that one, don't avoid it because we cannot avoid it. It will be there. We have to embrace it because AI will be part of our lives, will be part of our apps, will be part of our mobile phones.
Welcome everyone to the Top Employers Podcast, where we explore ideas and perspectives for a better world of work. I'm Livia, your host for today, and we have with us Alvin, who is leading global HR transformation at WS Audiology. WS Audiology is a world leader in hearing aid solutions, and Alvin is actually also double-hatting as the HR BP for the IT organization supporting the CIO. And he's here with us today to talk with us about the role of AI in the workplace. Alvin, thank you so much for being with us here today. Very happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. So let's start off a little bit lighter, Alvin. We're very curious to hear what first got you interested in AI in the first place.
Right. So I think a little bit of introduction about myself, right? And I think a lot of HR professionals will introduce themselves in this way. No, I'm not your typical HR professionals, in that sense, right? And I am really not your typical HR professional, and I can touch my heart to that.
And that's why I'm here.
Very simple. I graduated with a degree in computer science. Mm-hmm. Right? I spent my first 6 years of my career in IT, in consulting. And among those, the first 2 years, actually doing coding in programming. So you can actually say that I'm actually really not your typical HR professional, right? I'm a very enthusiast in terms of technology. People call it geek. You can call me that as well, right? Now back to your topic, right? What got me interested in AI? And I'm not interested in AI in the sense of a hobby, right? I'm a geek, but I'm not in that extent. What really got me interested is then there's a lot of, a couple of things. There's a lot of, I would say, news articles, a lot of media reports, a lot of things going on, both in the social media and the traditional media, about AI. So that's one big thing that caught my eye, right? The second thing that comes about is also then you start to see a lot of the big corporations, both private and public, going into the midst of actually AI. For example, in Singapore, we have then the AI Singapore, right? A joint agency collaborations with private institutions and public institutions in terms of looking at AI usage in Singapore. I think that's one. We also then have very big corporations like SAP, like Microsoft, launching their own AI tools, embedded in the existing platforms or softwares. So I think that gives us a little bit of a context of why, the area of AI or the world of AI is probably something that, we all need to take note of in that circumstances. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you are absolutely on point about that. I feel like I'm seeing a new report or a new article about it every other day. And I think to the extent where we are seeing some very, very conflicting views about AI, right? I think we have Goldman Sachs saying, okay, 18% of jobs will be replaced by artificial intelligence. But I think at the other extreme end, we also see some estimates at a staggering 80%. And so I think I'm personally not very surprised. There are a lot of people out there that are somewhere between, cautious and optimistic. And I think a lot of us are really just looking for new ways to frame our thinking around this. So, with this vast majority of perspectives around AI, Alvin, in your view, what do you think is the best way to separate the substantial from the sensational?
Right. So I think let's go back a step back, right? Before I even answer this question, how did AI came about, right? Is that an invention that came in like maybe, in the last 2 years, right? Or is that something that has been there that we didn't probably, realized, right? And I think as a computer geek, let's put it that way, right? As I introduce myself. And I kind of observed that it has been around for a long time. But I think that's where, I would say 3 main factors actually comes in and actually kind of intersect and actually, created AI, but actually led to then the optimal environment for AI to actually start off. So I think the first thing we need to look at is also then, data. A lot of the data out there wasn't out there 10, 15 years ago. And I think we probably can put it out to about 15 years ago, right? Because right now, why 15 is iPhone 15. 15 years ago, when Steve Jobs actually brought out the iPhone, actually introduced iPhone to the world, I think our lives have actually changed back then for a very simple reason, right, with mobile computing or mobile smart devices, we are doing more and more things, or probably everything, on those devices. And what does it lead about? It led to more data that's actually being produced, more data that has been produced on, I would say, behaviors and actually things that we probably wouldn't have actually have that, 15 years ago. As an example, the both of us are wearing smartwatches, right?
Yes.
Our sleep behaviors are being tracked, our interactions, our activities, all these are being tracked.
And I want the insights from the data as well.
Yes, and all these created a lot more data over the last 10 years, in that spectrum. I think that's one. The second thing, that actually led to this growth or this birth of AI is also where we start to also then see mobile computing or computational powers gets a lot more powerful. Going back to iPhone again, the latest iPhone actually has a 3 nanometer chip in there, right? And this also led to extreme, computational power in mobile devices. As an example, we could edit a 4K video clip on an iPad, right? Which 5 years ago had to be done on a computer. So second, the computational power that actually increases over the last couple of years. Yeah. The third thing is the connectivity, right? Yeah. We are all on 4G because Singapore has actually removed 3G from all our mobile devices. Some of us are on 5G, and 6G is probably, a couple of years away, right? Together with these three factors where we are able to process more information with more information and not having to be tied to a cable, this led to basically the birth of AI, or the creation of AI, and actually this created an environment for AI to actually come in.
That's fantastic context, Alvin. But do you really think that we are on the brink of an employment revolution that's led by AI?
Well, I think again, one step back, right? I was listening to a an interview, of a formal, mayor of Taipei, right? He was in the US, in Silicon Valley, to do a little bit of research on technology, with AI and things along that line. And then he made a very bold statement and got me sitting up, standing up, lying up, in that circumstances. Why? Because he is a little bit of context. Then he is a heart surgeon, one of the top heart surgeon in Taiwan, right? And he made this claim that in 5 years' time, a lot of the doctors or medical professionals who doesn't use their hands would have issues, right, with the rise of AI. So when I was listening a little bit deeper into his context, he was actually trying to make this point that with AI, a lot of the roles that is being carried out by medical specialists, like, for example, those who actually reviews X-ray films, MRI images, or diagnostics, those can be actually outsourced to AI in the future, right? Which is better than actually identifying, say, cancer cells or whatever, right? Than got computer versus a human eye, which is also then prone to mistakes and that kind of stuff. So I think that actually got me thinking, hey, actually, even highly professional, educated, roles like a doctor might actually be impacted with the rise of AI. What about others, right? So now to answer your questions, there are definitely truths that we are in the brink of I won't call it a revolution, but a kind of a change that's going to be led by AI. And I think we can go back to history a little bit in terms of looking at, what are some of the things that could be out there, right? A few years ago, or not many, I would say a few decades ago, right? When Microsoft introduces Outlook, introduces Excel, introduces PowerPoint, the Office suite, right? A lot of people say, okay, the role of personal assistants, the role of executive assistants, PA and EAs will then be eliminated. Come fast forward now, the roles of EA and PAs are extremely important to the big bosses and the CEOs and the C-suites. Why? Because with Outlook, calendar gets even more messy, right? It is the reality that's out there. Technologies, yes, it can, help us to a certain extent. We also then tend to do it in another way. So that's one thing, right? Excel. The rise of Excel actually said, the roles of accountants and other highly educated professionals, right, will be eliminated. We are still seeing a lot of accountants. We have good intakes of accountancies in the 3 universities in Singapore. Yep. the roles of accountants have actually changed. So they're no longer doing your mathematics, calculating and stuff. They're doing other stuff. They're doing FP&A, they're doing analysis, they're doing advisory. They're helping the business to do things, to advise the business on areas that are related to the numbers on an accounting sense in that circumstances.
Absolutely.
So those are, I would say, evolutions in that circumstances, right? There will also then be roles that will be created along the way, and I think we can touch a lot more on that, in the subsequent parts of the podcast as well.
Yeah, and no, I especially like the example about the doctors, because I think that's a piece where just because we are doing value-added work doesn't mean AI isn't going to impact us. Right. I think if anything, there's potential for it to create even more efficiencies in the way we work. Right. And I think I love that about the finance analogy also, because in HR, I think we're going to see something very interesting and very similar.
Yep.
What does AI mean for our HR operations? And what is that going to mean for the role of HR? Right.
Definitely.
I think we have some employees who see HR as my help desk. Right, but AI is potentially going to change a lot of that, and I think in very similar to the way finance is freed up to do a lot more analysis and business partnering. It's very interesting to see where I think HR could potentially have more time freed up to work on strategic initiatives.
Definitely.
So it's a very exciting time.
Yep.
Yeah. In your experience, Alvin, what are the most common myths you've come across about AI in the workplace?
Well, I mean, when you talk about myths, right, we talk about AI, and I always hear this, the era of the iRobots, a movie that's out there. I'm probably old enough to have watched this movie in the cinema.
It's a good movie.
In that circumstances where, human created extremely smart and intelligent machines, and the machines was become so intelligent that they have mind on their own, and they will start to take over the world, right? And I think that's essentially one of the biggest myths there is out there, right? That, people had that misconception that, when we created something, right, that a bad thing will happen, right?
Right.
So because, and that goes back again, us as human beings always have two sides, the good side and the bad sides, right? We always want to think of the bad sides. And I think it also goes back to the fundamental instincts of human beings, right? Even though we are in a very safe environment in Singapore, when we walk on a alley, which is dark, it's new, we have not walked there before, we hear the sound, we just turn back, right? That goes back to our natural instincts as human beings. When we see something new, we would be a little bit more alarmed, right? Our senses get a little bit more heightened. Yeah. So I think that goes back to that sense, where, we become more alert to such things. And I think this is the same as AI, right? It's new. We have not used it before, right? Similarly, we have not talked about our mobile phones taking control of our lives. Reality, we are. Our lives are now dependent and highly dependent on our mobile phones, right? We can lose our children and we cannot lose our phones to that extent. So I think that goes back, to that circumstances of why, we are worried about AI, and that goes back to the biggest myth. But there's also a flip side to it, right? Again, going back to another movie, right? When everybody who have watched Iron Man, they would want to have a very intelligent assistant like Jarvis. Jarvis is also an AI tool that's out there. So there's always that flip side of it. And I think the human being just need to get a bit more used to it. And we start to see more tools and more, usage of AI, and we are more comfortable with it. The iRobot movie from Hollywood would probably, not take place.
So that's actually a really, really important point about the way our brains work, right? I think because one thing we also have to recognize is the way that we are hardwired to amplify the negative and to downplay the positive. And I think that's just about being, a little bit self-aware, because our negativity bias is very, very real.
Yep.
And actually, there was one of the other pieces I was thinking about was the way that global news is produced and is distributed. Because I was actually seeing, I think, this report by Ipsos, the market research firm, where they were doing some studies over the last 2 years about global perspectives on AI. right? And I thought it was very interesting to see that some of our Asian markets have higher approval ratings of AI than I personally expected. So some of the markets, for example, were Thailand, Indonesia, and China, where approval is somewhere in the 74% and upwards range. Whereas on the flip side, we have some of our European and our US counterparts in the 30 to 40% approval rating range. So this is very interesting when you see the difference in the way different markets are perceiving the benefits versus the costs of AI, right, in our daily lives. And so one of the things I realized is maybe it just helps to be a little bit self-aware about what are we reading and where is it coming from.
Yep. And I think going back to the news articles, right?
Yep.
News articles, news media, they have a purpose. Similarly, right? Consulting firms, big firms, who releases white papers, there is motive, but there is a purpose, there is an action that, they want audience to take after they consume, the information.
Yes.
Consulting companies, they want you to buy services from them. They want you to buy solutions from them in that circumstances. So I think that's where we need to take an active mind and actually differentiate between the truth, and what is not the truth. And I think that's one thing. The second thing is also where we need to also pay attention and actually activate our mind, right? Actually think what we are reading. They may be facts, but is there another take on it? Because there's always a fact, you can always see it from the other angle in that circumstances. And then going back to your other questions, right? In talking about approval ratings in the Asian context versus the European context, I think that's also where it's a very similarity in terms of privacy laws. And it's very, very connected in the European market, in the Western world, where individuals are a little bit more aware of their individual rights when it comes to personal data. Yes. And I think absolutely. That's also where that I'm quite disconnect, but that differentiation between the different markets would then be in terms of that as well.
Going deeper into the jobs piece, Alvin, I think you mentioned earlier that AI could potentially have a positive impact on our creation of more professions. But at the same time, there is genuinely a lot of concern and apprehension about AI eliminating jobs, right? What do you think is going to be the true way in which AI will influence our future job market? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned in the earlier comments, right? Where technologies has actually shaped different ways of roles. I would then say that AI will create the market in a sense where there will be even more jobs that's going to be created because of the rise of AI.
Okay.
Certain jobs will be shifted, certain jobs will be eliminated. We can't move away from that. But the truth is that AI will actually create even more jobs than it displays. I think that will be one big thing. Again, going back to history, right? One of the biggest invention beyond air condition, right, is actually search engine. A lot of things that we do right now, we ask Google. We went to the search engine. When search engine was invented, was actually released, or proliferated in that sense, or actually being used, widely. It created new roles that wasn't out there. For example, search engine optimization engineers. There would also then be other things that actually comes with it. Peripheral roles, that comes beyond the usage of search engine. As an example, as human beings, we will start to, use the tool. The next thing we need to do, we monetize the tool. So what does it mean? It means that sales, marketing roles related to such tools actually start to happen. What happens after SEO? SEM, sales, search engine, marketing specialists, right? We start to actually then see a rise of such roles out there to actually help people to be top of the, search engine list where people start to click on it and things along that line. Yeah. So this gives us a little bit of a background and a history of what happens, with that. AI will probably be very similar. Why? Because we start to see roles such as search engine prompt engineers to be able to issue commands and prompts to ChatGPT, a lot faster, a lot more accurate, so that ChatGPT can able to actually produce the result that you actually need without having to communicate with it a couple of times in there. So I think, those are the key things that is out there from a, individual roles basis. But if it's to go a little bit higher, right, there is also from a macro or organizational view at a C-suite level, you start to see a lot of some of these slight changes coming in. New roles coming in the recent years. Chief Digital Officer, driving digitizations of the organization.
Yep.
Chief Data Officer, right, looking after the whole data governance of the organization, right? And because in big companies they rely on such data. As an example, I have a friend, who work in one of the big tech companies. They can't function, they can't deliver goods without using data analytics because the company is so big that they have to rely on reports and stuff to actually start driving that. Another new role that came out recently with the increased focus on sustainability, Chief Sustainability Officer that's out there. Next, my own prediction, maybe 5 years, 8 years down the road, Chief Intelligence Officer, right? Usage of AI in the entire organization. I think that's also one potential change that we might actually start to see, in big organizations that's out there, right? Going back, have we started to see, data protection officer that's out there in a lot of companies? That's something that wasn't there 5 years ago. Because of data and because of all these things, all these actually start to happen. We might also start to see another element in terms of education of another highly educational professionals, lawyers. Data Privacy Act wasn't there 10 years ago when, the lawyer take their bar. Right now, they is actually part of the curriculum.
Yep.
In the future, there might be, national regulations or even regional regulations, like for example, GDPR that governs, the usage of data. Right, in actually, the usage of AI in that circumstances. So I think that's, going to be trends that we probably can see or anticipate in the next couple of years in that circumstances.
One of your favorite, just picking up on what you said earlier about how one of the big tech companies can't operate without data analytics. I'm going to throw one more in there. What do you think about a Chief Insights Officer? Is that possible in the future?
Well, that's already something that is there in a lot of the organization. So it sits typically in a lot of I would say, for example, a lot of different functions, right? We have probably for example, in Audiology, we have a team that looks after data analytics. We look at people insights, right? We have financial insights. We then have, for example, insights in different areas, like for example, sales, marketing, and things along that line. The rise of Chief Insights Officers will eventually happen, and it's probably going to be even faster than my Chief Intelligence Officer, right? And I think the CIO is going to be heading the title, right? Chief Intelligence Officer, Chief Insights Officer, Chief Information Officer in that circumstances. And I think that's going to be where it is. And I think it's also a role that's being taken on by Chief Data Officer as well in some of the organizations that's out there. Beyond data, also looking at insights. And I think that's where, the congregation of power 1 + 1 is more than 2.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to what you mentioned earlier from the SEO, SEM perspective, and I'll try to tie this back also to the way in which this will impact some of our job functions, right? Thinking back to that transition, marketing didn't completely disappear. Instead, we had some of our traditional marketers having to upskill themselves and learn something new around digital marketing so that they can stay relevant. And of course, it's an uncomfortable shift, right? For an individual, I think let's not deny that. But what I'm hearing from you time and time again is that this is going to happen faster and faster than some of our old technological shifts around Microsoft and the creation of Outlook and all the rest of that. So that means that as individuals, we're going to have to be more agile and more AI savvy and get there quicker.
Yes. And I think, as a father of 2 school-going kids.
Oh, yes.
Right. And I think it goes back to our mentality. I think it's important to be agile. Right. And I think when I was being educated, when I'm still schooling in my age, right, what's our aspiration? We want to be doctors. We want to be lawyers. We want to be accountants. We want to be engineers. The roles that we are starting for is there. We can see it, right? But in today's day and age, when we ask, secondary school students or primary school students, what do you want to be? I want to be YouTuber, right? I want to be social influencer. And the reality is, these roles will also be gone by the time they come out to society.
That's true.
The reality is then that roles, we are not preparing students or younger generations for roles that is not even there. We can't even see it. And hence it goes back to the first step, which is then we need to be agile in our mindset. We need to be adaptable. And I think we need to be risk-taking, right? And I think that's not something very prevalent in a lot of Singaporeans, because we have been planned for in our whole lives. We are very pragmatic in our ways of thinking, and I think that's going to be the tools that we need to equip ourselves and also our future generations in terms of what's going to prepare us for the future.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, where parenting in an era of children growing up AI savvy is going to be a different ballgame altogether.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's look a little bit more at AI and HR as a function.
Sure.
Right? Do you have any views on how AI will impact or could potentially impact the core responsibilities and the tasks of HR as a function? How do you envision that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, and first and foremost, the most important thing, right, beyond we go into the technical details, right, is that one, don't avoid it, because we cannot avoid it. It will be there. We have to embrace it, because AI will be part of our lives, will be part of our apps, will be part of our mobile phones. It is already there with Siri and Google, right? In the next few years, employees is going to use it in their daily lives. So what makes workplace so different, right? I think that's the most important mindset that we need to have. Beyond that, my own views is then AI is going to impact HR in probably 3 different ways, and I'll call it, the first thing is what I call the handwork, right, inverted commas, right? Not the handwork that I mentioned in the doctors and the surgeons. The handwork here in HR is where we are potentially going to be reduced, automate, and probably eliminate as well. As an example, what is handwork? Employees calling up HR, what is my leave balance? What is my, leave entitlement? What am I entitled for? What is the policy? Yada, yada. These are things that we can offset, offshore it to AI for them to actually answer to the employees. And I think employees doesn't want to call HR to ask these questions, but our knowledge base doesn't contain all this. They would rather talk to an AI assistant, to ask about it and be able to give them very personalized information relating to our correct data that is out there. It's slightly different from now, where AI assistants now available in all HR tools are not personalized. They will just regurgitate out the policies that's out there, right? They will not be able to tell you what is your leave balance, because it requires to go into the HR system to actually see these sort of things.
They're functioning like a reader for the policy that was laid out by HR.
They're just a smarter search engine in that circumstances. The second thing that will impact HR is what I call the brain work, right? Brain work that requires connective thinking in that circumstance, and they will help HR in a lot of circumstances. Let me give you an example. We just completed the engagement survey, right, in Audiology.
Okay.
What is the 2 most difficult tasks after that? Analyzing the data, results, action planning, right? The analyzing of the data itself depends on the experience of the person, and the inkling of the person will go in different methodology, go to different segments, will start to see different things. Yes. There is no, I'm quite logic. There isn't a flow or a process behind it in that circumstances, right? But with AI, we have started to see it already. I saw it in a very, very short few second clip that we have out there in one of the launch video of Microsoft Copilot, where they have Viva platform, and they have this thing called the Viva Insights, which is part of the engagement platform that they have in Microsoft. You're able to write in very natural language queries into the system and ask which is the most engaged segments, why are they engaged, what are the demographics along with it. You're able to produce results to you in a matter of seconds, but it will take a person, right, a trained analyst a few hours to unearth all these things from the wide variety of data, wide spectrum and wide depth of data that's available in there. Because with an engagement survey, we are looking at tens and hundreds of thousands of data points that's potentially out there in that sense. So I think that's going to help HR in a lot of the brain work. But what it can't replace with HR is what I call the hard work, right? Hard in a sense of the heart, the mind, right? The interactions between different people. Goes back to, again, very, day-to-day lives, right? When we call out the bank, we rather talk to a person, a customer service person at the end of the line, rather than talking to, if you want to do a fee waiver, please press 2. If you want to do this, please press 1, right? We rather talk to a human being. And I think that's where the role of HR will never get eliminated, is then the business partnering, right? The day-to-day interactions between the HR, the organizations, and the employees, that cannot be replaced with AI, with technology, because we rather talk to a human being, rather than talking to a computer, right? And I think that's also why the role of psychiatrists will probably not be eliminated in the long while, because you can't replace a psychiatrist with an AI robot, right? I think the person who is having difficulties will have even more difficulties talking to something or somebody, right? In that circumstances, there is not a human being at the end of the day. So I think, to me, that is the three elements: the hand, the heart, and the brain, that actually takes place in the circumstances.
Going backwards a little bit, especially on, let's start out with the heart piece. This actually reminds me of a conversation that we had with, that internally our team had with the head of HR from Top Employees Institute recently. And she was actually saying that from a perspective of distributed HR responsibilities, employees and managers are there for each other and for their teams and their staff during the 80% of the time when things are going right. But that's where HR needs to step in the 20% of time when things are not going well. And that's actually where, I see your hard work coming into play, because there is a lot of problem solving and conflict resolution that needs to come in with a face-to-face element. And really, if I just think about my own experiences, if something's going on with a bank or with an airline, I'm going to want to talk to a human being.
Yes.
Don't make me wait like 45 minutes just to talk to a chatbot.
Yeah, and I think going back to the example that I mentioned, right? About things going wrong. I think it's not only a hard work; it's also a brain work as well. Because sometimes it's not a black and white thing where things goes wrong, things are not going wrong, right? The HR would then, need to combine both the head work, right, the brain work, together with the hard work, to be able to decipher, okay, something is going on here. My inkling is telling me that something's wrong here. Let me step in. I think that would then be, and that's also the reason why I mentioned about a brain work or head work. It is to help. It's not to replace. I think that's essentially the pieces. So it's actually a spectrum in that sense.
And at the end of the day, I think AI on the head piece, AI can really be interesting to prompt a wide range of insights that could be useful for you.
Yep.
But what actually makes sense for your organization, what actually ties back to your priorities and your strategy for the year or for the half, I don't think that's something an AI can replace.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Let's pivot and look at the role of HR as an active player, right? In your view, what do you think is the role that HR should be in terms of preparing the business for this new generation of AI-driven operations?
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned before, right, we have to embrace it. We can't run away from it. So I think that's where we need to be aware of the tools that's out there, the trends that's already going out there. So from two perspectives. So one, internally within HR itself, right? When we start to look at tools, when we start to look at trends, when we start to look at practices, right, that to a certain extent are using AI, we need to then not shut it down and say, oh, not applicable, right? We need to start thinking, can it be applied to certain pockets of the business, certain pockets of the employees in that circumstance? Take a risk, do a pilot, test it out and see whether we can work or we can't work, right, in this organization.
To our point earlier, thinking about the positive aspects of it and where it could work instead of,
Yes.
immediately shutting it down, saying, no, I'm sure that it won't work in this area.
Correct. So I think that's one thing, the risk-taking element, the experimental element, of using such tools. So that's something within ourselves. The second thing is also then about, the trends from a hiring perspective, and also then from a business acumen perspective. Are we starting to use AI in the organization? Are we starting to use AI in our services, in our tools, in some of the things? And then that's also where we need to be a little bit more aware that we might have to start to have a need of AI engineers along the way. And that's going to be maybe not so easy to find. Maybe it's also then to start thinking through from an academic perspective. Can we then create academies to actually, train people which have a certain, basic information or understanding of mathematics or science or things along that line, and actually start training them on these topics. And those are elements that's going to be there, for the taking. And I think the last piece, from an organizational standpoint, not so much in HR, is also then we need to be a little bit more aware of the circumstances of the usage of AI. As an example, as I was talking to my, HR, LT colleagues, I was starting to think, whether do we need to issue policies, about the usage of AI? I think it's not so much about using AI in part of the work, but it's also then what do we put into the AI prompt like ChatGPT, right, to, for example, generate certain insights. Because the more you throw into ChatGPT, it becomes that training data. Then things that you shouldn't be releasing to the public world gets out there in that circumstance. So I think that's a little bit on the ethical use, the control and the mechanism around it in terms of AI. And I think that's probably the tools, the roles that HR needs to play, from a broader sense, within organizations when it comes to usage of AI.
Absolutely. And with that, I think with that responsible usage of AI, I think one of the things to realize is, as individual employees, and with AI being such a hot topic, I think a lot of us may be experimenting with AI in relation to our workplace applications without necessarily an organizational strategy being rolled down around it. Right? I think we recently, internally once more, we had a workshop recently around AI because we're always trying to look at what's ahead of our top employers and how this will potentially impact, certified top employers in the future. But there were a lot of interesting case studies being thrown up. Well, we've already spoken about AI as a chatbot for our HR services. But there was also an interesting one put in where someone said, I use AI to summarize my meeting notes. That's one. And there was another one which was around creating my social media content. So I need to, maintain an active LinkedIn presence, and I'm actually going to come and ask ChatGPT, for example, what are some ideas I can actually share today? So individually, we may actually be doing a lot of experimentation, but with the role of HR, and to your point, in potentially setting guardrails around this, we know it's not new. Someone who is well known to be the godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, has recently come out to talk about concerns around responsible stewardship of the technology. And I'm wondering if you have any views on what responsible usage looks like within, the HR function.
Yeah. So I think definitely guardrails is needed, right? With the use of anything, right? A simple example, if my 5-year-old daughter comes and can I play computer game? The response would then be yes, and a guardrail will be for how long, right? So there is always a guardrail in terms of doing something, right? And then we need to have a certain level of guardrails. And I think to bring it up to an even higher perspective in that sense, the guardrail would have to come from a society angle, right? Again, going back to a little bit of a history, right? The rise of data protection laws in different countries. The most prominent and the most strictest among the all is the GDPR from the European Union, right? And it basically arises, I think back in the 1990s where data wasn't so prevalent, as I mentioned. Now it's become a lot more, wide ranged. So that's where, the different laws is there, regulations is there, the different legislation is there to actually make sure that, the usage of data is actually being protected in a proper way. The yes and the no's, right? No. So then, it goes back to the organization. When we start to see such things happening, right now we are in a very, very new zone where there are no guardrails. When people start to use it in a different method, different ways, we'll start to see regulations coming in, to fence up the whole thing, to see what is required and what's not. Now, coming back to the role of HR, right? The role to govern the entire usage, right, of AI in the organization is probably not lying in HR. HR plays one of the role. Okay. Very simple, because the usage of AI is going to be very widespread. Not related to the employees only, not related to one function, but across all different functions. So we then need different stakeholders to come in, your legal officer, your people matters expert, your technological expert, and things like that. And even then coming in from an external point of view, different practices that's going to be out there. So I would say that right now, not very prevalent in terms of defenses. Doesn't mean you can start to go out and actually start using it in different ways. There are still certain level of ethical boundaries that we need to use, right, when it comes to start using of such the information and data and those technologies in that sense.
And I think that's also about timing, because we're at the moment in time where AI is being used in pockets, but ultimately I know that we also see that AI will ultimately impact and will be used by everybody. And therefore, I hear your point about shared responsibility around guardrails, that it won't just be HR alone, but bringing some of the different leadership and the different functions to really set guardrails around that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we've been talking about how AI will impact everyone.
Yep.
And I think it's also fair to recognize that AI will bring significant life impacts to some people more than others, right? What do you think individual employees can do to ensure that they are staying relevant in an era where, AI will eventually be built into many, many parts of an organization?
So I think the first thing here, again, going back to what I mentioned, is to have an agile mindset, right? And I think something that I can steal from my daughter's school, and pedagogy is also then to have a growth mindset, right? A growth mindset in the sense of, whatever you have learned is not the end. And I think we need to constantly, I would say, upgrade ourselves. Upgrade ourselves not in the sense of taking courses, right? Because I think, again, another fixed mindset of development comes from the sitting in a training center for 3 days and then you will be expert in it. I think that's going to be, not going to be very much the case, because technology moves so fast, right? Mm-hmm. By the time a course is written out on AI, something would have moved.
Yes,
so I think that's going to be the key thing here, is to be agile, is then to absorb, information from different sources. As an example, I probably learn more things on YouTube than anything else, right? When I don't know how to do something, I'll go and search YouTube, right? In that circumstance. I think those are, I would say, elements that we need to then start to think of in that sense. And I think going back as well is also where individuals as employees, individuals as us as a person, we then need to also be aware of the surrounding. We need to be able to then use it in our personal life as well. As an example, right? Most people are not using Siri, right? In on a mobile phone, right? But my 5-year-old is using Siri lots of the time, right? Talking to the speaker, and things like that. I think those are, I don't call it generational elements, but those are elements that we need to then move away, from our usual practices in that sense. And I think goes back again as well to, I would say individual employees that are then not so well educated. It's also where they need to constantly be aware of the surrounding and then start to upgrade themselves in that sense. And I think organizations, will support them in their quest to actually start moving up in their circumstances in that sense.
First of all, I really like your daughter's school or her teacher. But it's, I'm absolutely with you. I think the individual ownership over our own learning process is something that, I've always been very, very passionate about. Be it YouTube, be it podcasts. I was learning from Wikipedia growing up, but our children may be in the generation where AI is their learning buddy, right? Rather than just, a phone or something that I use, but actually something that's a very, very integrated part of the way I operate and the way I, the process information and absorb and learn. So absolutely, absolutely. So I would like to shift gears now, right? Let's shift gears now to something a little bit different, a little bit more fun. We're going to lay out some beliefs and claims.
Sure.
And I think we have some cards here for you where we would love for you to read, to label them as fact, fiction, or it's complicated.
Okay.
All right. So this is going to be a rapid round. And, I'd love to hear from you why you think, it's a fact or it's a fiction or it's complicated. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. So the first one is, soon AI will be smarter than humans in all areas.
Oh, Corey, it's complicated.
Okay, why is that?
Do I need to explain?
By all means.
So I think AI is as smart as the data that's actually pouring in, right? The training data is actually coming in, and the computational power in that sense. And who created it? Human beings, right? So we are fundamentally one step ahead. If, the big if, we continue to improve ourselves, we continue to actually move forward in our thinking, in our knowledge quest, in terms of everything that we actually do. If not, then it becomes a fact in that circumstances. And the scenario of iRobots might come back.
Looking forward to having Jarvis in my life.
You will soon.
The next one is, AI is neutral because it uses data.
I'll call it fiction. Very simple. AI regurgitates or produces what is being fed in. If you fed in a certain direction, of a certain belief, it will produce information in that circumstances. So at the end of the day, it is based on what is actually being fed, right? Similarly, like human beings, if you consume a lot of information on certain topics, we'll start to change our belief in that circumstances as well. I think that's how the brain works.
And that's where I think ultimately it's I think it's onus is on us to be conscious of the good actors and the bad actors in the usage of AI. But what I really enjoy is even among my young nieces and nephews, they actually become very, very much self-aware of the intention behind AI. And sometimes they'll come to me and say, no, you shouldn't read that because that's a fake source, or that's, I don't believe in this YouTube because of this and that. So I'm actually impressed at how savvy our younger generation are getting. The next one is, AI can handle all employee training without humans.
Well, I wouldn't be able to go back to office if I said this is the fact, right? To the L&D department. Reality is, right, we are starting to see a lot of innovations in the area of learning technologies regarding AI. As an example, I have seen, trainings on performance conversation, how do you have difficult conversations with your employees, right? On a VR headset, right? Wearing an Oculus, you have a person sitting in front of you, you practice using that in that circumstances. One, you cannot last long wearing the VR headset, right? I don't think you can take a 1-day training on that. You'll probably start vomiting. That's one thing. The second thing, again, going back to humans, right? We like to have the human interactions. And I think most of the time, trainings is beyond the knowledge that we gain. It is one, the connections that we built in that training curriculum, in that seminar, in that course.
Absolutely.
Is the intellectual exchange between different parties, is the intellectual exchange between the trainers and the trainees that actually create more information. Because, there is this saying that I've actually heard. There isn't anything unique that can be created. What is being created and is being labeled as inventions
was created by someone else.
Yes, and it's basically pieced up together basic using different pieces. So to me, training will never be, will not be, right, eliminated totally and being carried out by robots or AI or technology in that sense. It will augment, that, but I think that will then be the limit that it can go.
All right. The next one is AI in HR will replace in-person talks with chatbots handling most issues. Most issues. Most. So now you have to think about it.
No, I would still say that it's actually a fiction.
Okay.
Right. And I would say that, to me, it will replace probably 30-40%.
Okay.
Right, of the interactions there is out there. And I think also then goes back. And I think this percentage will typically go up a little bit higher, as we move down the years. Why? Very simple. If you try to call your nieces, they will never pick up. They'll respond back with your WhatsApp. Yes, can I help you? Same thing with my 12-year-old. You call her, she will never pick up. She'll respond back with a WhatsApp message. What do you want? We are in a generation, we have given birth to generations where they are comfortable with texts, but not on voices. So that percentage will actually start to increase a little bit more as we go, right? But in our older generation, my grandmother, they'll pick up the phone and start calling, right? Because that's where they are comfortable with. So they will replace a lot of the interactions that are there that I mentioned, a lot of the handwork, of the interactions right there. But I would then say that, I would say easily 50-60% of the HR work, relies a lot on the employee to the manager's relationship and things along that's out there, right? As an example, as an employer, I can't write to a chatbot, can I have an increase of pay? And these are the reasons, bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3.
Love to see what the chatbot says.
Yes, they will reply you no. Because that has been trained by the chatbot to replace to say no, right? So I think that's essentially the circumstances that we are in. We probably will not see replacing most, in that case 60-70%, but the percentage will start to increase as the generations goes into the workforce in that sense.
Absolutely. All right, we have a few more. Employees not using AI at work risk losing their jobs.
Fiction?
Okay, there's a lot of fiction coming out here.
Yes. Like I mentioned, right? Psychiatrists. I don't know. I'm not in that field. Would there be AI usage, in terms of psychiatrists, tool of work? That's probably not something that's going to be there. There might be, I don't know. But that's, to me, in my perspective, a lot of the things that is out there, right? We will start to use more and more AI. That is for sure. But I would then say it's going to help us in our work and not replace us in our work, because that's essentially, what I was trying to say.
All right. And I think here we have the last one here is AI will have a net positive impact for the environment.
Environment in the sense of physical and
sustainability, the ecology,
I would say it's a fact. I would say that as an example, right? Let's use an example of a pipe. Right. If a pipe is burst or is broken or there's a leakage, with technologies, with AI, with sensors and things along that line, you're able to identify and tell people, right? Oh, you are there's a leakage here. Instead of rather than seeing a pile of water, or a flood, that you start to see water being used or being reduced. I think that's one. We also then start to see, more intelligent machines with the increase of sensors, increase of computational power, increase of data, starting to give advisories, to companies, right? In the management of their physical environment, you can switch off this aircon here because there's nobody here, right? I was in Schneider Electric. I think it was about a few months back. So I was touring their facilities. They have a smart building, and that's part of the services that actually they produce. They have a smart environment, smart building management system, where they actually is able to identify, this meeting room is actually empty. They switch off the lights and things like that. So I think that would then create a net, impact on our environment in terms of sustainability, in terms of all these things that's out there. Because, it reduces the laziness in human being, working out a meeting room, switching off the meeting rooms, right? In that circumstance. So I think that's going to help us in that sense.
Like how ultimately we humans would have a positive leaning towards anything giving us a little bit more convenience.
Oh yes, that includes my daughter asking Siri to switch off her lights.
There you go. And if Siri can switch off the lights before she even asks Siri, I'm sure she would love it.
That I'm not too sure.
At the right moments.
Yeah.
Okay, so now to end off, we actually have a few not so serious questions.
Sure.
I'm actually very excited about this because I don't know what they are either. So they're actually, all right, so I've got to turn this over and read them out. And we will keep the same format of fact, fiction, and it's complicated. Oh, I love this. Okay, so the first one is, Star Trek is the best TV series ever made. Fact, fiction, or it's complicated?
Complicated?
Okay.
Matter of fact, I don't watch it. Right? And it really depends on individuals, right? If I were to say it's the best TV series, then somebody that that likes something else, I would would say no.
What do you think is the best TV series ever made?
Honestly, I don't watch a lot of TV.
Okay. Too busy watching YouTube to learn about AI.
Probably. But I do like the recent seasons that's actually out there on Apple TV, which is Ted Lasso, right, which is related to football. But I think there's a lot of elements of human, there's leadership, there's insight that show in that sense.
Very nice. I have to put that on my watch list now. Definitely. Yep. All right. The next one is, bubble tea is overrated. Oh, it's also complicated. Are you a bubble tea fan?
No, I'm more of a coffee person.
Okay. Same.
How many bubble tea I consume in a year? Less than 5.
And yet it's not overrated. Why is that?
Because different people likes it, right? Certain people, it's a staple, right? It's a life-saving mechanism, right? Ooh. They go through something tough, bubble tea. Right?
That's true.
100% sugar, more bubbles, right?
I like it. Psychiatrists cannot be replaced by AI, but they can be replaced by bubble tea.
They can be helped by bubble tea. And it reduces the need to go to a psychiatrist.
Oh, all right. I really love this. This is contentious. Work from office is better than work from home.
Okay. Complicated. Very simple. To me, the best arrangement is to a certain extent a hybrid workplace. Right. A best of both worlds in that sense. As an example, myself, right, if I were to need to have a little bit of a focus time, to create a deck of slides, to create a presentation, to create analysis, I'll tend to do it at home.
Same.
Lesser distractions. But if I need to have, sparks of ideas, that's where you go into office, right? When the interactions of 1 + 1 more than 2 comes back again, right? Of having more sparks. I think the important thing is that we human beings, and I think we went through 2 odd years of COVID, we gotten very used to it. It has proven that it works. Good. But I think we still need human to human interactions, right? Similarly, when I go back to my previous discussions and stuff, and we can't eliminate humans, we still need to have that interactions and stuff. I think that's where, officers has that place, to do that. And I think that's where, teamwork and things of stuff, will be a little bit easier, and a bit more fruitful in terms of that interactions. But to me, is then the future of hybrid is definitely already here. We are hearing politicians in Singapore wanting to pass law where it's going to make it mandatory and things along that line. But I think that's going to be the trend that's going to be there.
And that's a whole different podcast episode altogether about hybrid work. But maybe next time. All right. Oh, you're going to love this. Every child should learn to code.
Oh. It's a fact. Not because I came from a computing background, not because
really?
I know how to code, but I've heard of this thing, right, or this phrase that's coming in. The third language in Singapore is programming language.
Oh, yes.
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 And I think not because this revolution of AI, not because it's where it gives you a chance of going into a technological driven job, but I think with programming or coding, it trains your mind to think in a lot more logical manner, right? If this, then that. If not, then this. How then do we do certain things in a different manner and things along that line?
Yes.
Right. You may then go into humanities studies, geography, or in not so tech-related roles like, for example, finance. But when you know coding, you're able to build your Excel macro, to be able to do things that's faster than other people, right? That cuts time for you in that sense. So I would then say that programming or coding, trains out different parts of your brain. Need not everybody be a programmer, right? In that sense, but I think it gives you a certain level of grounding where it actually helps you in the long term future. And I think both of my girls actually are in that curriculum. Even my 5-year-old, she's not learning coding, but she's into playing with robotics and things along that line.
At 5, fantastic. I never actually thought about it that way, where coding actually will hone the logic centers of your brain. And that's a very interesting one. Even if when they grow up, or even, if they're interested in the social sciences, which my own background is in the social sciences, but that logical reasoning and the logical flow will always help you in the workplace, no matter what you're doing.
Yep.
So yeah, very interesting one. All right, we have the last one. Slightly contentious. APAC is the best region to live in.
To live in.
Live in.
To me, it's complicated. It's a mixture of both. Why? I think different people have different preferences and different habits when they're growing up, right? Let's say, for example, if I'm on a business trip for about a month, right, I would, for once, the first place other than reaching home, the next place I'll hit to is a local hawker center, right, or coffee shop, because I think that's what we grew up with. That's our comfort. That's our sense of okay, I'm home, right? I am the most comfortable here. I think that's for me the first thing. So there isn't a particular region that is, the best, among all. I think that's for me the first thing. But I think the other elements is then you also start to see a wide, populations of expatriates or different people from different countries or different regions coming into APAC. Why? Because I think one is the openness of APAC towards different cultures. Second thing is also that APAC is a hybrid of many cultures.
Extremely
Singapore
different.
and Malaysia are very similar, but yet we are different, right? In that circumstances.
And we have our North Asian countries in China, Japan, Korea, and
Vietnam, Thailand.
Within a very, very small geographical area, I feel like we have so many different countries, and let's not forget our Pacific counterparts.
Yep.
So I'm absolutely with you.
Yes,
it's complicated.
So to me, that's essentially the reasonings behind why we see a lot of non-Asians sitting in here in APAC, vice versa as well.
I think we're a little bit fortunate.
Yep.
Here in Singapore.
Yep.
But thank you, Alvin. I think that wraps up what we had today. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your special flair to this episode. And I really, really hope you had a good time.
Right. Thank you. I definitely do.
Thank you, Alvin.
See you soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, do give it a like or a comment. We would love to hear your views. Share the episode, tag someone that you think should see it, and also remember to subscribe to our channel, where you'll find all the details in the description down below. We would love to stay in touch with you. Let's stay connected, and together let's create a better world of work. See you next time.